Thank you, Kim. Now I'm not advancing my slides. Thanks for having us. Greg, I'll let you introduce myself and then yourself, and then I'll introduce myself.
Thank you very much, Tom. My name is Greg Lang. I am the Executive Director at the Good Samaritan Health Centers of Gwinnett. Gwinnett is the second largest county in the state of Georgia, the fastest growing county, and we are the largest charitable provider of healthcare, primary care, chronic disease management, and general dentistry in our community.
Thanks, Greg. My name's Tom Ralzer. I'm one of the founders of Convergent Nonprofit Solutions. The short description is that we raise money. We're fundraisers, but we do things a little differently and always have. This is my 27th year in the business, so we've been around. We work with a lot of different types of organizations, and we think what we have to say to you today might hopefully be useful to you. So we're just going to get started because we got a lot to cover. Today, what we hope you take away is the difference between donors and investors. There is a difference, and we exploit that all the time when we're raising money for our clients. We're going to talk about identifying your most fundable outcomes, and clearly Greg's going to finish up with how to communicate them to have the most impact, and he's very, very good at that. This is our approach and sort of a touchstone to how we view things, that if you don't demonstrate the value of your organization to potential funders, they have a lot of choices, and they'll simply fund an organization that does demonstrate that value. Now, being in the healthcare field, there's a lot of different organizations that would put themselves in that category. We sometimes the distance between what you're delivering and what you're raising money for is a shorter distance. Sometimes it's more circuitous and harder to get to. And what we try to do is shorten that distance and make it as direct as possible. So no matter how good you are at your job, let me move something around here a little bit. No matter how good you are at events, and we call them the 3 Gs, galas, giveaways, and golf tournaments, you're still going to spend a lot of time and probably have a lower return on investment on fundraising than you are in a major capital campaign with planned giving, those types of things. And that's not going to be news to you. But as we work through with a lot of different client base or folks in the base, we are sometimes amazed by how much they actually spend on the gala, for instance, compared to how much money is actually raised. Now, we all know that's important to do that. It's brand building, it's donor acquisition, a lot of different things go into that. But the actual raising of money, it's sort of farther down the list than a lot of things. So that first learning point that we threw up there earlier was the difference between donors and investors. And I want to give you just a few examples of what that really means. Years ago, I looked at all the campaigns we had worked on, and there were some 600 different campaigns that I looked at, and I tried to figure out what made some of them wildly successful and why did others struggle. Now, you'll notice I didn't say others failed. As you folks know, in the development business, you can always raise some money, but I'm going to give you an example comparable to the retail business. If you're in retail, you can always sell your inventory. If you put it 90% off, you will sell it. You will move the inventory. But at that point, you're losing money every time you sell something. And it's sort of the same thing with campaigns. You'll always raise some money. But if you're setting out to raise 100 million and you only raise 20, in our book, that would be a failed campaign. So you'll always raise some money, but what were the common denominators of what made some of them succeed and others struggle? And it came down to those that had struggling campaigns really didn't earn the right to ask for large dollars. So a lot of what I'm going to throw at you here is based or is drawn from a couple of these books. Primarily the one on the left, the one called Asking Rights. And I want to explain what asking rights are. Asking rights are simply the ability to deliver outcomes that are valuable to investors. It's a very simple definition of what that is, but there are a couple operative words there that really carry a lot of weight, and there's really a lot of background to them. Let me go back just a second. Outcomes. In the health field, that's widely known. It's widely understood. In a lot of different sectors, it's really not. A lot of folks concentrate on outputs, things that are easily measured, not the outcome, which is the impact you have on your primary customer. But the other operative word there is investors. And you'll notice that I didn't say donors. And that's on purpose. That's very deliberate. And from that investor's perspective, it's important that we really get to the heart of the problem is, why should I give your organization money? If I'm one of the deep pockets in the community, everybody's after me, wants me on their board, wants my money for their campaign. And I know the drill. I've been interviewed for feasibility studies, blah, blah, blah. We've got to answer that question and differentiate why you may be more deserving than the other folks that are asking for that money. And the traditional methods that have worked for decades and decades and decades are slowly eroding, and they don't work nearly as well as they used to. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything that you haven't experienced already. And the best example I can give in a graphic is that it's imperative that your fundraising effort does not look like this. Of course, that's a tin cup. And that tin cup is it shares these common attributes. One is everybody's a target. And the second one is you'll take any amount of money that they're willing to part with. In other words, we call that begging, and that's what's signified by that tin cup. If that sort of sounds like how you're raising money, of course, it's not the best way, and there are ways to improve that. So the donor versus investor difference. Typically, a donor will ask, have you demonstrated the need for your services? You've maybe heard that before. They're trying to get more information from you. But an investor will ask it a little bit differently. How is giving you money, how is giving your organization money going to improve that situation? And that's really different. That's really a different way to look at that. Another way, a donor will typically say, have we spread our money around to all the organizations in our community or our region that are addressing this problem? Banks, by the way, are very famous for trying to do this. Banks have a wide customer base. They like to spread their money around. And honestly, a lot of foundations like to do the same thing. An investor, though, will say, is this the right amount of money to bring about real change? And there's a difference. One is about spreading dollars around, kind of keeping everybody happy. The other is, this is the one we want to focus on, and is this the right amount of money that will bring about change?
Tom, can I throw in a comment, please?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's for that last bullet point that you just mentioned. If you'd go back, thank you. The issue with the tin cup and the begging that you mentioned a moment ago is that from where I sit, I think that conveys desperation. And an example that I can give you is that my wife and I are contributors to other nonprofits in our community. I certainly give to my own, but we also support our church and other nonprofits. And one of the nonprofits that we really appreciate ran into funding stream issues, and they started blasting newsletters that more or less said, if we don't raise this amount of money within the next 6 months, we're going to be out of business. And it really challenged me to continue to give more, because my question was, what happens in 6 months and 1 day? Where are you going to be? there was no messaging that said this is how we're going to change our operations and this is our new fund raising strategy that's going to provide us with stability and sustainability. It was all about let's keep the lights on right now, and an investor will not go into that. A merciful donor may drop some money in that, but an investor will not.
Very good point. Thank you. And I think it's probably important to say at this point that it's not as easy as saying what differentiates the two is the amount of money. It's not you're a donor if it's $100 or less, and you're an investor if it's $100 or more. That changes with every cause, every campaign, every organization. Last one I want to throw out here is a donor will ask, what activities did you undertake to address the need? Again, that sounds like you're doing a post-grant report that wants to say basically, how did you spend our money? But an investor is going to say, what results did you deliver and how did you improve the lives of your primary customers? And again, that's a very different way to look at this. That top one, the donor is activities, that's an output focus. An investor will talk about outcomes, and that's important. And what we have found in all of our campaigns is that the higher you go up the food chain to the more and more deep-pocketed investors, or let's just say the wealthy investors or the larger corporations, the higher you go up that food chain, the more interested they are in the outcomes that you're delivering. This was said to me, it's a quote from a person that I worked with a few years ago. I will not mention who they were, but you all know them. You have one of their products in your home, I would bet money on. They're just pervasive. One of the wealthier families in the country, and they were involved in one of our campaigns, and they said this to me face to face. If you, and by you it was the organization that we were representing, can't demonstrate results, then you don't have the right to ask for money. And if you can't make your outcomes meaningful to me personally, then you don't have the right to ask me for money. And that really has stuck with me all these years, in that these are folks that typically get that appear on the radar screen of many nonprofits, whether they have a relationship with them or not, whether they have a connection with them or not. And they've gotten to that point where if you can't, you may do wonderful things. You may be a true community asset, and the hole left in your community would be huge if you went away. If you can't tell me what those outcomes mean to me, then you shouldn't be asking me for money. And that was really the origin of the term asking rights. You've got to earn those, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Motivations to give money is best, I feel, the best quick, easy way to do this is with something called the motivation pyramid. And this is not mine. This is not my brainchild. This is from a lady named Kay Sprinkle Grace, who wrote Beyond Fundraising years and years ago. She's a lady that is based out in Silicon Valley. And I just thought this was the best way to talk about the motivation of people giving money, often referred to as the 3 C's, not the 3 G's that we talked about earlier. These are the 3 C's. At the bottom of the pyramid, you have those that have the capacity to write a big check or make a big pledge. One level up is a concern. They have a concern for the need you fill. They have a concern for the problem in the community that you address. But you're not up to that top level yet. They're not connected to the organization, your organization, or the efforts or the gaps that you're filling. And it's very simple to look at it this way, is that you start at the top and you work down. As you all know, fundraising is a top-down, inside-out process. So you start at the top, those that are most closely connected, and you expand from there. So this could easily be represented by 3 concentric circles with connection in the middle. But that's the inside-out process. But I choose to use this pyramid because Many, many nonprofits start at this wrong end. They start at the capacity level. If you're of means, if you're a high net worth individual, we're going to target you, and they completely bypass that concern or connection. And that's why their campaigns are very difficult. So throughout a campaign, if you move those that have the capacity up to the concern for what you do, and you move those that have a concern up to the connection level for what you do, the money will naturally flow. And that's represented by this right-hand side, where the bigger dollars, of course, come at the top, and so on. So day to day in a campaign, what you're really doing is finding ways to move those people up a level. One deeper level of this is that that connection can be an emotional or a rational connection. Emotion plays a big part in fundraising, but we are seeing a distinct and large movement towards the more rational giving. We can talk a little bit about that in a moment. That concern can be sort of light or heavy. It can be a passing concern, or it can be a concern that you've had experience with. Maybe it's a disease that's looking for the cure or whatever. You're going to be more concerned about it if it's touched your family or touched you personally, obviously. That capacity level, there are a couple dimensions to that. It might be wealth, it may be older money, it's often referred that way, or it could be high income that doesn't have wealth, or new wealth, often referred to as new wealth. A lot of ways to look at this, but it's got to be something, you know, motivation is in the title of this webinar, and we needed to address this point. Now, where we're going with this is that the connection doesn't always have to be emotional, and your outcomes and how valuable they are is a wonderful way to institute and integrate that rational connection. You've heard me use the word outcomes probably more than any other word today, and so let's talk just a little bit about that. Again, you've heard this before, the ability to deliver outcomes that are valuable to investors. If you do that, you have the right to ask them for money. If you don't do that, you probably will struggle with getting those pledges in. Now, how do you know, before we get too far down the road, how do you know what outcomes are going to be valuable to your investors? A lot of times we assume we know that. Oftentimes we don't. The best way that I've found in all these years to figure out what's valuable to investors is to ask them. Sounds easy, isn't done all that often. So again, back to asking rights. I looked at over 600 campaigns. What were the common denominators to their success? And it came down to these three things: credibility, fundraising skills, and outcomes. Same thing, different set, different graphic, but they all need to be present for you to actually raise big dollars. And here's why. Well, let me go back just a second. Now, credibility, that gets you in the door. That's the critical fundraising advantage. Think of your organization compared to an other organization that does not have the credibility. You're going to get the appointment. You're going to be higher on the list. You're going to be get their attention. That comes from cultivation, years of that, years of keeping people informed of what you're doing. So that gets you in the door. Fundraising skills, obviously important. Making the ask, the cultivation, the recruitment, presenting of the case for investment, all important. But the most important one of all of those three is outcomes, because of this slide. Truly believe this. Your outcomes are why people ultimately invest in nonprofits. They probably don't say it this way, but they think this way. Let me put it a little more bluntly. Haven't met a person yet that likes to see their money wasted. So if your outcomes are not good, if they're not relatable, if they don't understand them, maybe they're simply not communicated well, you're probably leaving money on the table. And here's the critical fundraising advantage to outcomes. They justify the amount of the ask. In other words, if I'm doing a good job relating my outcomes to you individually, showing their value to you in dollars, cents, percentages, improvement, and so on, if I'm doing a good job with all of that, I'm increasing my right to ask you for money. And again, that's just something I said. The critical fundraising advantage is outcomes justify the amount of the ask. If you've got armor-plated outcomes, you've got the right to ask for more money. Again, we talked about outputs. Many organizations stop at that level. They're easy to count, so a lot of organizations do it. Okay, it's a measure of activity, but it's not a measure of impact. Impact you have in your customers' lives. That's what most people are worried or concerned about. That's what they want to know. It is more difficult. Sometimes it takes some downstream follow-up to do it, and we know that costs money. But what we have found is that investors are willing to pay for that extra effort to track outcomes, because they want to know that before you go back to them the next time and ask them for more money down the road a little bit.
I'm going to insert an example, if I may.
Perfect.
So again, we are a medical clinic, and we have our in-house dispensary. We keep in inventory about 140 different medications, and we make those available to our customers. I do report an output, and that is how many prescriptions do I fill in a year. That could be interesting because it's often a large number, but what really matters in regard to medication is how many of the prescriptions that I wrote were filled, and how many of those refills were requested on time, because that is a more profound measure. That if I can say that 90% of the prescriptions that we write are filled, that certainly shows that I'm, at least from a pharmaceutical standpoint, helping the majority of my customers. And if I can say 95% of all of our prescriptions are refilled on time, that suggests that there's no lapse in medication, which confers a healthier patient. So yes, I do tell you how many prescriptions we fill, but in our foundation grant reporting, we go deeper than that and talk about, because it's really a measure of patient compliance. And the consequence of that is that we have a healthier patient base.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So while we're talking about outcomes, I want to bring up this point about investable outcomes. And I'm not going to dwell on it because we could probably spend an entire day on this. But we have a phrase we call investable outcome. And what is that? It's an outcome that has a reasonable chance of succeeding. In other words, you may be putting it in the hypothetical. The reason we are having this campaign is because we want to do X, Y, Z. People have to see that you have a reasonable chance to do that. It can't be pie in the sky. We were dealing with, I'll give you an example outside of healthcare for a moment. We were dealing with a YMCA as a client, raised a lot of money for them, and they were instituting a wellness program. And a large part of that was diabetes awareness, case management, and so on. They could not say that they were going to eliminate diabetes in that community. That would not have a reasonable chance of succeeding. People would not believe that, and that would undercut that outcome from being investable. It has to have an acceptable return. You'll notice return is in quotes. Sometimes that return can be very quantifiable. You can talk about dollars saved. You can talk about the market value of the prescriptions. You can talk in very distinct terms. Other times it's a little bit softer, but a lot of effort we usually put in with our clients to show what that return might actually be. Can be translated into a value. The closer you get to that value, the better off you're going to be, the more that outcome that you're raising money on is going to be successful. And then lastly, that outcome has to allow investors to connect the dots easily. By that, I mean this. Their money, in this case, is the input. Something's going on in the organization, your organization, and what comes out is that outcome. They want to be able to track that. It can't be a black box. It's got to be something that they can actually see. They may ask you for a map of that, a graphic of that, of, okay, my money's coming in the pipeline. You're going to do this, this, and this, and those actions will result in this outcome, and that's the outcome you're asking me to fund. That's why you're doing this $10 million campaign. The fewer the dots, the more direct those dots are, the more successful you're typically going to be. Now, there's only 4 check marks there. There's more to it than that. That return, that second bullet, that can in itself be quite a challenge sometimes. But the general categories of that will be societal costs that you're reducing or societal benefits that you're enhancing. That's one way to look at it. Negative outcomes, you're minimizing. Positive outcomes that you're maximizing. And then lastly, you've done all of these things. These are the conceptual things. The last thing we want to touch on, and I'm going to turn it over to Greg, is the communicating of those facts. And Greg, I think I need to run the arrows on the PowerPoint on this side, but I'm ready to do that.
Okay, go right ahead. So this is a couple of pages from our 2022 impact report, and I have put a lot of data up here. We can just pick out a few. For one, I mentioned medications a moment ago. You see the orange pill bottle that said that my customers appeared at my dispensary window 3,865 times, and we delivered a little better than 5,000 prescriptions. That's an output, but I am able to measure through our electronic medical record what % of prescriptions we write are actually filled. There's data that says that when a patient gets a prescription in a doctor's office and must then drive to a pharmacy, 35% of those prescriptions won't get filled because of the inconvenience of going to a second location. If I can fill that in our office, there's a 90% chance that the individual holding that prescription will fill it. And that suggests a greater health compliance, which reduces, increases the health outcome for that individual. So we are able to talk about that when we have, the forum for being able to do so. One of the things that's important is how much of our services are rendered at no charge. We are not a free clinic. We do have reduced fees, but we're also very generous, and we waive fees in cases of financial hardship. And you can see that we delivered 2,335 no-charge visits and arranged for 178 free mammograms. We talk about the number of those mammograms that resulted in a adverse finding, and then take credit for helping to save a life by getting early intervention on suspicion of breast cancer for those free mammograms. The no-charge visits is a reduced burden on our emergency room, and we can talk about what we think is the avoided uncollectible medical debt that our hospital might have incurred if we had turned those individuals away and just told them to go to the emergency room. We also report the value of our volunteer hours. We use a tool similar to Glassdoor to assign a value to the different professions that volunteer for us, and we report that out as well. So I think outputs are important because it helps to justify things like how many employees you have and the size of your budget. We have 60 employees and a $4.5 million budget. So our outputs helps to describe our capacity, but describing beyond the output to say, what does this really mean? as Thomas suggested, is so important to the investor. Yes, we did vaccinations for children. That improves child well-being. Well, children go to school, which means that there's a greater chance that that child's going to advance through grades on time rather than be retained because of a high degree of school absenteeism. So we try to look at the actual count of what we did do, and then what are the positive benefits and social consequences that result from all of that output. And when you get to that point, you're now talking about outcomes. Tom, if you don't mind running to the next one. And then, of course, we have to report our financials in our annual reports, and that's what that slide there shows us. I mentioned that we're not a free clinic, that we do charge fees, and our patients are actually our #1 contributor to the sustainability of our nonprofit. But we are selling our services at a very discounted price, about the 25th percentile of what the private practices in our community charge. I know the value, the retail value of what we charge, and we estimate that based on our patient visits, so that I can tell my donors that for the contribution that they made to us, we were able to generate services that were equivalent to about $11 million in, I apologize for that interruption, $11 million in the for-profit marketplace. So we've saved our customers that much medical debt. And we also use a rubric. It's a website that helps you to estimate your social return on investment. It's based on a number of variables that you just input into this calculator, and we report that each year. So for the 30,000 people that came into our organization, those that we kept well, those that we prevented unnecessary use of the emergency room, prevented unnecessary hospitalizations, we generated almost $30 million worth of social investment on return on investment. And the measures that support that are what is the percentage of stable housing in your community? What is the percentage of on-time graduation among your youth? What is the job retention in your community? So we take credit for that as much as we can. We know that sick people don't usually go to work. If I can keep my patients well, they go to work. And when they go to work, they can pay their rent, which means that their child doesn't have to move from school to school as the parents run to the next lowest cost living arrangement. So that's part of what Tom refers to, I believe, when we talk about connecting the dots. Absolutely. And last thing that I'll say about this slide is that I'll just draw your attention to that circle total revenue, $4,175,000. But then down at the bottom in that blue bar, just off center to the right, my operating expenses were $4,282,000 last year. So we actually lost a little better than $107,000. That didn't frighten us at all. One, we easily understood we're still in the disruption of COVID, but our investors are so confident in our ability to deliver the outcome and are so convinced on our necessity as a nonprofit in this community that they actually give us more money than we need. We have a seven-figure operating reserve that helps us to absorb that loss, and we were able to take on that loss without reducing staff or reducing the services that we offer, and we were able to do that because of the confidence that our donors have in us, and they continue to help us be stable and viable, as a result of the contributions that we make in the community.
And Greg, let me add to that the fact that you are able to have that cushion, that extra operating revenue cushion, is because you have done things like keep them informed and do show them your outputs and how they translate to outcomes. And You mentioned some of the things that go into that social return calculator. We do the same thing for all of our clients. We just kind of build it by hand, and taking credit for the fact that jobs are being filled and that housing is stable. I don't think that's at all taking extra credit. I think you deserve every bit of that, because people don't go to work when they're sick. Along the same lines of, they can't get a job if there's no childcare, right? So those organizations that provide that can take credit for some of that same outcome. So
Sure.
there are a lot of ways to do those types of things. So thanks very much. While you were talking, I was looking through some of the questions that have popped up, and I think we're to that point where we could talk about some of those. The one I want to tackle first here, because it's probably the largest, is when a major donor says no to an ask, what's the best way to offer other options and continue with a relationship? That is really a loaded question. I will answer it this way. They're saying no for a reason. I don't know what that might be. I don't know why that keeps popping up there. I don't know why they might be saying no, but you have probably heard every excuse out there. If not, let me give you a few examples. It might be, our budget year's over. We've already given away our allotment for the year. It might be, I just retired. It might be, I just sold my business. It might be, I'm going through a divorce. I wish you were here last month. Just gave it away to the other one. Whatever it is, there's a reason they say no. And what we have found is, why is it no? Because I can't really offer you the best solution to get that to a yes, other than, or I need some basis to do that. Now, in a campaign context, if you're about to launch a major campaign and you're first doing that feasibility phase, where you're talking to people confidentially and sort of testing the waters and see, to do the feasibility the correct way, you're going to get to that dollar question, that money question. You're not asking for a commitment, of course. You're simply saying, this is our plan, let's just say for the next 5 years. Do you like it? Parts you like, parts you don't like? The parts you don't like, why is that? And that's very similar to the no. They may have a long list of reasons they don't like what you're presenting to them. It may seem too expensive. For what you're building, it may be too expensive, or maybe in the wrong location, or we've got somebody else in the community filling that need already and they do a pretty good job with it. So I'm not sure we want you to duplicate their efforts. My point in all those examples is, it's no for a reason. So my first piece of advice would be, get to the reason. Then you'll have a much clearer idea of how to offer other options. It's probably not what you expect. A lot of times it's not. What I started with is, I just sold my company, I just retired, going through a divorce, whatever it may be. Those are convenient excuses. They're very real. Don't get me wrong. I'm not being flippant about that. They're very real, but it's probably not the real reason. If it's a budget thing, if it's the wrong year, part of the year and timing, give me a time next year so I don't find myself in the same position and coming in too late. Maybe it's a cultivation issue where you're kind of surprising them and you haven't kept them in the loop along the way. We have found that you cannot raise money by ambush. It just doesn't work. The people you're typically talking to have seen this drill before. They know why you're there to talk to them. If they're on the side of coming up with excuses to say no, or reasons that are sort of thinly veiled, they're going to have them. So getting to the reason it's no, it's probably not no because they don't like the organization. You probably do wonderful things. There's just a definite reason. It's to get to that reason and then find ways around that.
May I add to that? I I really like to build relationships with our investors. I never ask on my first encounter with someone. I might wait 3, 4 visits before I start to talk to someone about a gift. Um, I, I reach out to people just to stay in touch through email or walk up if I should see them in a social setting, but I don't turn every one of those into a request for funds. I think that's important because you'll get more honesty from someone that doesn't think you're going to ambush them. You don't want to be that fundraiser that your donors run from if they see you in the grocery store. Um,
Exactly.
but if you have a relationship with
Happen, right?
right, if you cultivate a relationship and you really steward that where you learn enough about them that you can appeal to their individual interests, you're going to get a higher degree of honesty from your donor. When someone says no to me, I don't expect them to justify the no. I just say, that's fine. I honor your decision, but tell me, have we disappointed you in some way? And because we have a positive relationship, they're going to respond almost instinctively to tell me, oh, no, it's not that, it's this, because they don't want me to believe that they have become disappointed in the organization that they have invested in. So I just use that, kind of like, oh, I'm so sorry, but have I upset you? Have we done something wrong? Um, uh, Response, and that will usually solicit a very honest answer.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to throw this one to you if I could, Greg. Um, do you have any suggestions on building relationships with physicians/caregivers to get grateful patient referrals and find major donor prospects? I have a feeling my answer might not be like your answer.
So the question is, what do we do to establish relationships with physicians in order to facilitate referrals? Is that right?
I'll read it verbatim. Do you have any suggestions on building relationships with physicians and caregivers to get grateful patient referrals and find major donor prospects?
We create volunteer opportunities at every turn for physicians to get to know our organization. Instead of golf events and galas, we do have a G, and we just call it a gathering. We will invite 6 to 10 people together into a restaurant or in one of our facilities, even in the home of another donor, to just tell them about our organization. It doesn't include an ask, it's just an information sharing event. And the physicians that volunteer with us are willing to do that in their own homes and bring in their colleagues, because if they're volunteering for us, they believe in us and they're willing to share their belief in us. We have an individual employee whose job is to do physician outreach to find out, one, is that physician charitable in any way? Are they willing to receive referrals from us? And we ask what their parameters are so that we manage our request for help at a threshold below which the physician said they can tolerate. I certainly don't want to overwhelm a physician's office and with too many referrals that will result in that phone call stop. We didn't know this many people were coming. We don't want any more. I think the tail end of that question was how to find large donors. I think everything that we've said so far, just communicating your value, letting people get inside your shop and see that you operate a high quality organization, always results in someone contributing to you and at levels that probably surpass your expectations. But that comes after you've earned their trust.
Right,
I hope I
right.
answered the question. I apologize if I did not.
Yeah, that's a hard question. The major donor part, you know, in the healthcare philanthropy, we're in the world with a lot of high wage earners, all the doctors and so on, all the executives of the hospital and so on. It's a field that has some very high earners that also serves a lot of very low income populations, right? So there's a lot of difference there. Typically, when we're working in healthcare philanthropy, the physicians themselves do not make up a majority of the campaign team, the campaign cabinet, you might call them. A lot of times they have a different view of it and so on. Now, with a specific hospital that they've worked at for many, many years, that's a different story. And the hospital themselves has a foundation, or have a foundation, obviously. But I just put the paradigm this way. Rather than go back to that pyramid with the 3 C's, it's not important to start with the capacity of the prospect. Do they have the ability to stroke a big check? It's important to start with establishing that connection with them. Some will have the capacity to write large checks and some won't. But rather than start with capacity and then trying to find ways to please them, it's start with what you do, get people connected, and then that your outcomes will lead you to the people that can write big checks for that. Oftentimes in healthcare, and this is something that you may not have thought of it this way, the service that Greg's organization provides helps people, obviously, and it helps, let's just say, the workforce. It keeps them healthy so they can go to work, right? Who values that outcome the most? The people that employ those people. The people that employ those people that you help keep healthy have a vested interest in what you do. And I don't know this because I was not involved in Greg's last campaign, but I'd be willing to bet that some of the people that were investors in your last campaign were the folks that employ your people that you serve.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the key to this. While we got a few minutes, I'd like to share one example here. Let me make sure that I'm not missing a question. Earlier we talked about, and maybe I can go way up here to this pyramid again. This connection being emotional or rational. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question of everybody. And I can't see anybody's faces, but I've done this enough to know that you're probably going to agree and shake your head that you understand what I'm talking about. Several years ago, you were watching TV, sitting on your couch and watching TV at night, and the commercial comes on. And in the first image you see is an abused dog. And then you hear the Sarah McLachlan piano music in the arms of an angel playing in the background. And they show another picture of an abused dog, and so on and so on. So a lot of you, do you remember that? It happened all over the country. 3 other organizations, that was ASPCA, 3 other organizations copied that ad campaign in their own way because it was so successful. The fact that most of you probably remember that ad campaign tells you that from a marketing perspective, that campaign was very successful. You remember it. It was sticky. Now, a lot of people will comment, I got to change the channel. I got to leave the room. I got to go get a ham sandwich, whatever it is. But they remember it and it sticks with you. So again, from an advertising perspective, they would say that was a great commercial. From a fundraising perspective, not so much. It didn't raise that much money. It raised awareness, because very few people, I often ask a follow-up question, very few people say yes to, and I jumped off my couch and wrote them a check. So there's a difference between an emotional connection to your outcomes and the raising of money and monetizing that emotional reaction. They're just 2 different arenas. And I'll leave you with, on that same point, with this thought. What the danger of relying too much on that emotional connection is this. what are they going to do next time to get your attention? Are they going to show a dog that's almost dead? See, and that's the downward spiral of relying too much on that. And I think that's why a movement towards the more rational outcomes, I want to see the value of those outcomes and so on. I think that's why it's getting more and more traction these days, and is very much a part of how we raise money for our clients. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. That's how you might be able to get in touch with either one of us. I know that Kim has a copy of this presentation that she has already announced that she will send out to all of you. And with that, Kim, are you going to jump back in?
I am, and just to give you and all of the attendees a big thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.